Welcome to Parent Coaches Unleashed, the podcast where we dive into the highs, lows, and did that really just happen moment of parenting teens and young adults. We're Carrie and Jessica, parent coaches, mythbusters, and occasional referees in the battle of hormones versus common sense.
If you've ever wondered, is this just happening to me? You're not alone. We're here to help you with real talk, expert advice, and hopefully a few laughs along the way. Need more support? We also offer private coaching, workshops, and speaking engagements because sometimes even parents don't have all the answers.
So continue listening as we tackle this parenting journey together.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Parent Coaches Unleashed. We have a really special guest with us today, Abbey Henderson. Welcome, Abbey. Welcome, Carrie. Hello, everybody.
Hi. Hello.
So Abbey is going to talk to us today about, I feel like growing up, this was a very taboo topic. We're going to talk about money. And one of our listeners actually said to us, it would be really great if you can have someone on that could help talk to us and help inform our college kids about what and how to treat their money. And I actually have a daughter. I have a senior in college that's getting ready to graduate, and she is a theater major. So they are, although I think it applies to all graduate students, the one class that they're missing is how to deal with your finances once you graduate. Because as a theater former or technical side, you go from show to show and you might not have an annual salary. So how do you deal with your finances in a situation like that? Anyway, Carrie and I thought it would be wonderful. And I'm going to let Carrie introduce Abbey since she had the pleasure of finding her along her travels. So, Carrie.
I found her on a boat in Croatia. She might have thrown me a life vest or a raft or something to get to an island. But anyway, Abbey, I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Abbey also hosts her own podcast called Wealth Beyond Riches. So not only is she the owner of Abaris, am I saying that correctly? Abaris?
Well, I roll with anything, but
okay.
When I say it is Abaris.
Abaris Financial Group, and she has a very in-depth background. She went to Dartmouth, to Boston University, Boston College. So we're talking to a real smarty pants here, and she has the personality to go along with it too. And she is a fellow yogi, so even better. Anyway, so Abbey, share with us what put you on this journey of being a financial advisor, but also coming from the life coaching, financial advising perspective. Like, I would love to hear how you got where you are today, and then starting a podcast, because we know that in addition to having a full-time job is not an easy task.
Well, so it's interesting because this is sort of a good lead in to what you learn as a child, particularly around money and career and all those things really sort of pushes you along the way. So I came from a family where my dad was a business owner. The message was my daughters will become self-sufficient. So I went to college. I sort of wanted to follow in his footsteps. So I was an economics major. And coming out of Dartmouth, I sort of fell into a program, an MBA program at BU that was for liberal arts majors in accounting, which was perfect at the time. So I got some experience. I got my MBA and I got some experience in the accounting world. And I realized I loved the math part of it. People are going to think I'm crazy. I loved the individual tax part of it. I hated the audit part.
Okay.
And I happened to be really lucky, and the firm that I was working at had a personal financial planning group. So we sort of walked into the partner's office and said, will you please let me change departments? And they were gracious enough to let me do that. And then sort of the rest is history on the financial planning front. So became a certified financial planner, had my own company, and I don't know, probably 10, 15 years ago, I started to really focus on, well, what do I really love about this? Because after a while doing cash flow projections, it's just another cash flow projection. So what is actually getting me out of bed in the morning? And it was the relationships, and it was the people, and it was seeing families realize they could do things maybe they didn't think they could. See, working with multi-generational families. And so that sort of tipped me towards figuring out how I could deepen relationships with clients. And that ended up putting me on the coaching path. And so I've sort of been on this mission to figure out how I can really marry the two together more and more.
I'm just really curious about the name of your company. Does
Yeah.
it mean something?
So Abaris is a character in mythology. And this was sort of back because I founded Abaris in 2001, so I wasn't that far out of college and the Greek system and the whole thing. So he was a healer, and I think there's a lot of healing involved in being a financial planner. He was also an oracle, which I wish I was an oracle. That would come in handy. And he's loosely related to Pythagoras, so there's like a math connection there. So, and I didn't even realize that it put me at the top of every alphabetical list.
Oh,
That's
that's
perk.
genius.
Oh, that's amazing. And I know I'm going to hear from my older son that I mispronounced it. And how did I not know?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to get that too, for sure.
No, because honestly, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. If we're going like by the mythological definition, so it's all good.
So money. You sound like you grew up talking about it. I did not. I was not taught anything. And actually, when I met my husband and I was already working as a teacher, he said to me, "What do you mean you're not maxing out your pension plan?"
401k.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I said, "Nobody ever told me that." And then it was, "What do you mean you have credit card debt too?" It was everything. But to be fair, nobody ever sat me down and said, "This is what you should be doing." So when do you start talking to your kids about money?
So I think step one is actually figuring out what your own money things are and getting clear on that, because you are teaching your kids about money because they're watching what you do.
Right.
So like, I think step one is getting clear with you and your partner, like, what is our stuff? And also what do we want to teach them
Right.
about, family values around money? We don't, in an ideal world, we want our kids to grow up with a healthy relationship to money. So not a lot of fear around it. Sometimes, it's unfortunately, a lot of times I hear women say, well, I don't need to know about that because my partner does it. Like, to have sort of like a sense of, this is important for me, no matter how I orient myself to the world and to other people and within a family. So I think step one is figure out what's your stuff and what do you want to teach.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then start early. So I think that there's, a couple categories of teaching. One is just basic literacy. So to your point, like, what even is a 401k? What is a savings account? So that's one piece. The other piece is good habits. So you can know those things and not have good habits around them.
Okay.
And then values, which I kind of touched on already. Like, what are the values around money that you want to see in your kids?
So what if you want your kids to do better than you did, but you don't know where to start?
Well, so I think, once you're clear on the big picture, then I think you create a strategy. And, to your original question, like, where do you start? It can start as young as like little kids, kindergarten, first grade. I mean, it's a little bit different world now where most times kids aren't really seeing actual physical
Right.
for money anymore.
Right.
But kids still like to play, store and restaurant, and they still see you signing the credit card slip. So like, just even starting to help kids understand that there is an exchange of money for things
Sure.
that they're getting.
Yes.
And then I think as they get a little bit older, it becomes understanding that there's trade-offs, the sort of the wants versus needs
Right.
thing. And then, I think that the question of an allowance comes in pretty quickly, and should you or shouldn't you? And, I think that you want kids to start to understand the trade-off concept. It doesn't have to necessarily be like, I'm giving you $100 or I don't know even what, $25 a month to spend. Like it could be for like back to school shopping. Like this is what we're going to spend for this particular thing. Why don't we have a conversation about how we're going to allocate that? And then, obviously if they want the really expensive sneakers and there's no money left for the actual clothes, then that's just a way to have a conversation
Sure.
of trade-offs.
Right.
Okay.
And how important is it, or how early do you start this? Like, if they do want those expensive pair of sneakers, having them contribute. Either you split it 50-50, or,
Mhm.
okay, let's see how much the sneakers are, and then let's teach you how to save for those sneakers, right? Like, is that something we could
Absolutely.
do elementary, middle school, or do we wait till they're a little bit older in high school and actually earning money, right? Because if they're younger and you're giving them the money as allowance and then they're putting that towards the sneakers, are they learning the value?
I think the key is, are you sort of reinforcing the concept of trade-offs?
Okay.
So, you can buy or save towards the sneakers, but that means you don't have money necessarily for this other thing.
Okay.
So I think it's the trade-off piece. And I think that you can start that as early as you think your child is ready for it.
Mhm.
I mean, there's going to be a spectrum of when, I think when kids are ready to understand that lesson. And, if you've got a kid that's ready, I don't think it's too early to start.
I think it's interesting also in this day and age, as we mentioned, kids don't see a lot of transactions taking place other than either with your phone and using Apple Pay or a credit card, just touching a screen. I know this happened with my own children. It's such an abstract concept to use a credit card or your phone because you're not actually seeing where the money's coming from. So one of my favorite stories is my youngest, he was, I don't know how old, let's just call him, he was 13, was going to buy a gift for his girlfriend at the time. And he took out his credit card that is our credit card attached to, and he's like, don't worry, mom, I'm going to get this one. And we had to sit down and have a whole conversation. Like, I didn't even think to explain that to him before he had it, but they don't know where that money's coming from. It's not that you just take a credit card and someone's paying it. Who's still, how do you explain that? Because it does feel like such an abstract concept. Are you just showing them your bank account, then you take from your bank account to pay your credit card?
So the answer is yes. And I think that there is value in kids in probably in the middle school general range actually having a savings account where
Mhm.
they can, you can show them the actual statement, and you can start to explain, deposits and withdrawals. And unfortunately, yeah, it is going to be probably showing them the app on your phone.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't even know if there's not paper statements really anymore either to, pull out of the mail and show them. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I will tell you. So, my middle guy, who is 20, the bank that we were using for them started charging ridiculous fees for not keeping a minimum balance
Mhm.
in. So, we switched the kids to a bank that gave the grace to college students until they were maybe 24 or 25. But I was so impressed with the person who helped us set up the account because she had him set up all of the auto pay. She had him set up, she showed him what to do. And she said, just so you know, this is going to come out of your savings and go into your checking. She walked him through all of that.
Mhm.
And I just thought that was such a great,
Mhm.
lesson for her to be able to teach him. And I just sat back and watched and listened, and he really understood what he was doing, so that was really helpful.
Yeah, the more they can actually like do themselves, and even it's probably worth making them, if they have a savings account, actually reconciling it a couple times to understand what that really means.
The more they gave him the tip, we set up a credit card attached to his bank account so he can start building his credit.
Mhm.
And she said it doesn't matter, even if you use it just to go buy a burger, when you go home, take the money from your savings and put it into your checking to make sure that it's there to cover.
Yeah.
And she said, don't even carry a balance, just even if you just go and pay off the burger right away, because then the quicker you pay off, and I don't know if this is true or not, maybe you could speak to that, but the quicker you pay off your credit card bill, the higher your credit will be.
I think within reason. I don't think, necessarily paying it every transaction
Right,
is
right.
gonna help, but certainly, I think there's value in maybe doing it twice a month. And I love the idea of sort of moving the money from savings to checking, because in a way that's giving feedback to your son that sort of what's left to spend,
Right.
as opposed to not, maybe seeing that whole balance and mentally forgetting that there's going to be a credit card bill to pay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how important is it, or at what age should they be paying their own bills, right? Like starting to pay their credit card payment, even if it is set up on auto pay. But right when they go to college, they might be responsible for the electric bill or things that they've never understood or paid before. So, is that something it's critical, like in one of those top 10 things your kids need to know before they go to college? Like, is that a critical one, or is it they'll figure it out when they have to?
I think as much real world experience as you can give your kids as early on as possible is just going to set them up more for success, even if you're like coming behind them and giving them the money to pay the bill. So, I think just going through the motions and seeing what a bill is, and that there's, deadlines, and setting up auto pays, because anything you can do automatically is a huge advantage.
Right.
So I love the idea of real world experience with mom and dad as either the safety net or even coming behind them and actually like putting the money in the account, because it goes back to that building good habits
Mhm.
idea. They're starting to build that even if maybe they aren't necessarily fully responsible for it yet. And this is probably a good moment to just put a plug in for the danger of DoorDash, mom and dad's credit card with no limits on it.
Mm.
That can get out of hand pretty quickly. I've seen a lot of clients who will tell me that their biggest food expense is their child's DoorDash.
So
Again,
that's another example of they don't see
they don't
what
see.
they're spending or where their money is coming from or going to. They
Yeah.
could see how that could add up.
Right.
Yep.
And understanding, right? If I pay for when you're at college a meal plan, it costs X, right? And then all you're doing is ordering Uber Eats and DoorDash, right? Like that's now a double expense for something that's already paid for. There, if they had to pay the bill themselves, they would probably think twice about just, not planning for the food. And that's what happens. They don't
Right.
plan for the meal. And so it's the quickest, easiest solution to getting food in their body.
And in fairness, I think I see a lot of peer pressure with college kids and young adults in terms of what their friends are doing, particularly if sometimes not everyone is in the same economic situation. So in fairness, it does get complicated, but I think these are all opportunities to have a conversation with your kid and sort of explain even your experience in the same situation, because I'm still in that situation sometimes, going out to dinner with someone that I know is in a very different situation, and how do I navigate that? So I think they're all great opportunities but the key is you have to take them. You have to take them as an opportunity for a teaching moment.
That's a great point. What about investments? How many different options of investments are available to a child that's, I guess, under 18? And then when does that switch for them?
So it depends a little bit on whether you really want the account to be sort of registered in their name. So, for example, my nephew is 16 and he's always been really sort of interested in investing in finance. His dad is a money manager. I'm obviously a financial advisor. So I actually set up a little tiny brokerage account in my name, and I put $500 in there and I let him pick the investment.
Okay.
So, that's a way that you could have sort of someone under 18, or you can also, it wouldn't have to be in my name. You can also set up what's called a UTMA or UGMA account, a custodial account, where the parents are the sort of custodian and the minor is the beneficiary. That would be another way you could sort of do the same thing. And I don't, in his case, if he wants to buy something I don't agree with, I still let him buy it. I go online and buy the one share of whatever, because it's a great way for them to learn you can make a mistake in investing and what that means. Once they get a bit older, they can certainly have investments of their own.
So when you say investments, are you talking about stocks in particular, or?
It could be anything. So, I would consider a savings account an investment in some ways because it's earning interest. So that's a great opportunity to teach kids about compounding.
Okay.
And that, starting early means that you're earning money on that, or earning on that money longer. It could be an account with stocks or mutual funds, or there's a very wide range of options.
Okay.
One thing to think about once your kid has their first job or had their first paycheck, that's a great opportunity to open a Roth IRA for them. Fidelity actually has specifically a Roth IRA for minors.
What do they consider a minor? Under 18?
Under 18, I believe.
Okay.
And just for your listeners, if maybe they don't know what a Roth is, you put the money in, it's a retirement account, or it's supposed to be. If you put the money in, there's no tax deduction up front, but the money grows tax-free and it comes out tax-free in the future. So it's great for kids who, have earned a little money, aren't really going to pay taxes anyway. You can put money in and have it grow tax-free for ideally, as long as possible.
That feels like one of those abstract concepts for them. Like, why would I start investing in my retirement when I am not even in college yet?
Yep.
Listen, it's so important, but that's another conversation right there. Just having them see the importance of money for retirement. Right?
Yeah, and you could even show them if you do $1 at, 16, what that could grow to at even 40 or 50, because all these kids want to retire early. So what that would be versus if you put the money in starting at 25.
Right.
All right. And how important is it for them to participate in a company's 401k from the get-go? Like, is that something they could put off, or is that something that a parent should really support?
Wait, are companies still offering 401ks?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I don't know that every company does anymore.
They probably aren't matching.
They aren't matching, but they are.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think parents should very much support it, even if it's not a huge amount of money, because it reinforces the idea that it's just gone from your paycheck. So going back to the idea of anything you can automate is better.
Yeah.
So, and then, also the concept of pay yourself, sort of pay yourself first in terms of savings before you then go pay for other things.
Wait, talk more about that. So they should take a certain percentage of their paycheck? Is there a number you recommend, or?
Oh, I'm greedy as a financial planner. I'll take their whole paycheck if I can get away with it. Start with something that feels comfortable and then increase it over time. So, and you can come up with a dollar amount, maybe it's $50 out of a paycheck, whatever that percentage is. And then, encourage them to make a plan in 6 months to reevaluate it. Did you get a raise? Can we increase it from that perspective? Even increasing it by 1%, every year is a wonderful practice to get into. And then make sure they actually invest it. I see a lot of people put money in 401ks and then it just sort of sits around in a money market, which I think is less likely now, because there's many more options that are just sort of like target plan or target funds that plans default to. But it's really important to make sure it's actually working for your kids.
Okay. Do you have a suggestion for, let's say, a child was either gifted by a grandparent a certain lump sum of money? Let's just go with $5,000. What would you advise would be the best way to use that money, or invest that money, or save that money?
Again, I'm greedy. So if I could talk them into saving all the money, I would. But, I think it
But
also
when you say saving all that money, do you mean just putting it in like the Roth IRA or putting it in a savings account? When you say save it, what does that
what does
mean?
that mean? I would say potentially a mix. So I would say in a savings account that is earning interest. So if we're talking 18-year-old
Hmm.
or older, I would push more for a high yield savings account that's
Okay.
actually earning interest versus sort of like the typical bank savings account, which typically the interest isn't great on that. The Roth, you're going to be limited to whatever they earn or the annual maximum, which this year I think it's 7,000.
Okay.
So there's an automatic limit to that. And then, I wouldn't, if you think that your child is going to use that money for a car, let's say, then I wouldn't obviously put that necessarily in a Roth. Ideally that money's locked up. So
Right.
you a little bit have to determine like what is the use of this money? What's the time horizon? Do I think my child is going to want or need to use it? If it's, I would say less than 5 years, I would lean more towards a high yield savings account.
Okay.
Got it. All right. So we're on with the college kids and job discussion, but do you have an opinion? And this is, your opinion being in the financial field and advising other families. How would you advise parents who are battling the in state versus out of state tuition decision for their children? Do you
Yeah,
have any advice? How can parents look at this?
and is there ever a time where you say, this is when it makes sense to go out of state for school?
So I guess I would answer that by saying I do not believe that parents should ever jeopardize their own retirement for the sake of paying for college. You can't take a loan for your retirement. So I guess that's sort of step one. Step two, I think I have seen a lot of success within families where the child did have some loans in their own name. And again, this is sort of like they have a little skin in the game. They're starting to understand what it means to have a loan, even when the parent fully intends to help them pay it off. And then, sort of the in state, out of state, I think that I know it's really hard to say no to kids, especially when they see their friends, maybe doing other things. But
Right. And when they've worked so hard in high school to
when they've
get to
worked
where
so
they
hard.
are.
Yeah. I think it's an honest conversation about where your family's finances are, what you can afford. It's not an easy conversation by any means, but I think you're also really setting your kids up for a better understanding of how to actually responsibly run their adult lives
Mm-hmm.
in terms of budgeting and what you can afford and return on investment. Is there a better return on investment in an out of state school versus an in state school? A lot of times the answer probably no.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean none of that makes that an easy conversation.
Right.
No,
Oh, no, no,
no.
no, no.
Yeah.
Well, none of these things, are easy conversations. Parenting in general
Well,
is
no.
not an easy job at all. And as we talk about, like, no one trains us to do this job. And so, obviously,
Nope.
again, that's why Jessica and I are doing what we're doing to try to help along the way, make it maybe a little bit easier.
Mhm.
But it just starts with the conversations early on. And I know, families, it's taboo, right? Like my parents didn't talk about money and finances. And actually, when I was in college, so I grew up in Illinois and I went to an out of state school. So I went to Indiana University. And my freshman year, my parents moved to Florida and they were trying to bribe me my sophomore year to transfer to University of Florida because it would be in-state
Yep.
tuition for them. They were bribing me with a car, everything. And I was like, now you're going to do this?
Yeah, that's a hard
But
sell after you've already made one decision.
yeah, no, it wasn't happening. But again, right, like if they would have said to me, I mean, I would have been heartbroken, but if they would have said to me, we really can't afford it, this is going to affect our retirement. Now, they did not say that. I continued at my college and certainly very appreciative, but I knew then if I wanted to go back to school to get a master's, I was going to have to pay for
Yep.
it. And that's what I did. I went to work. I worked for a company. They paid 90% for my education.
Oh,
So, yep.
I was
And
not that lucky. I paid for mine.
yeah, it was not the plan from the beginning because I was one of those undergrads that said, I will never step foot in a college classroom ever again when I graduated. And then, like a year and a half, 2 years later, I was like, I'm bored, right? Like, I think I need it. And I could see the future potential of having an additional degree. So I
Mhm.
was like, all right. And they were offering money. I'm going to do it.
Is there anything that you think, Abby, is a pitfall to avoid in terms of kids and money, whether it's investments, or is there anything that they should stay away from or parents should try to have their kids stay away from?
So I actually love kids making mistakes. I love everyone making mistakes because you learn better from them. The key is let's make small mistakes without long-term consequences. So, I would say avoid anything where there's going to be an impact to future credit.
Okay.
So, low credit card credit limits. That's something where if they do get in over their head, you might want to bail them out. So you'd want to avoid that. I would say, at the point we start talking about larger amounts of money, you might want to have more in-depth conversations about taking huge risk with investments.
Mhm.
If they are going to do a $5,000 Roth, maybe have a conversation about not putting, the $5,000 in some, seemingly hot, small, risky stock, because those things you're not really going to necessarily come back from. That could go to zero, and then your $5,000 is gone.
Right.
But with that said, I don't mind like $500 being put in one of those stocks and not going to zero. I mean, losing $500 is terrible, but you'll remember that lesson.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably won't put all your eggs in one risky stock basket ever again.
Talking specifically about the stock market, when we allowed my youngest to invest a small amount of money in stocks,
Mhm.
he has a teacher who's been really inspirational to him in that and motivational in working with the stocks. But when we let other friends with kids in the same grade know that we were allowing him to do this, their take on it is that's just like gambling. You're teaching him to gamble with his money. What do you say to that?
I see. I would push back on that because investing is a critical component of being an adult who is earning a decent income and wants to retire someday.
I mean, it's not about the quick fix when you're looking at investments. It should be the
For long term.
long-term
Right.
retirement purposes. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and it's an opportunity to talk about diversification. Why do you have 10 stocks and not one? Why do you have a mix? Why do you not have 10 tech stocks? Yeah, I would push back on that. I think investing is a critical skill.
How do you teach it?
Just the
I
way you're doing it,
no, but not just me. Like I'm thinking my youngest, yes, he really enjoys it. My older two, they're not there yet. And they keep saying, I don't even know the first thing about it. And I'm like, "Well, I don't either." Like, is there a stock market for dummies? Like,
There
how do they begin
yeah.
to
That's a totally reasonable place to start. I mean, I don't know if every parent will have success getting their kid to actually read a book about it.
right?
It might be coming up with, just things that might interest them anyway. So like Tesla's in the news for better or worse, maybe you use that as an opportunity to say, so, there's such a thing as Tesla stock, and it's, a share of the profits of Tesla as a company. And, you can actually buy these. And, what do you think is happening to the stock based on sort of what you're seeing in the
Mm.
world? I think it's trying to take small steps, not do it all at once, look for opportunities that actually are relevant to your kids. My dad bought my sister like 2 shares of Nike stock way back in the day
Mhm.
because that was very relevant at the time.
Right.
So finding ways to, I think, to make it relevant is helpful as opposed to just like, well, this is the S&P 500.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, my uncle bought both of my kids Disney stock when they were little, so they watch that and they learn from that. And we've actually been very lucky. Our financial advisor will actually take a phone call from my children if they have questions. So, would you do the same for any of your clients?
I do the same. Yeah, I include it for at any age, for any conversation. To be honest, I don't know how common it is. I think it's, one-off phone calls. I think you'll find most advisors will say, of course, developing a relationship with your child that perhaps doesn't appear to be compensated, that you might get more pushback, that might be less common.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I see it as an investment in the parents who are, my primary client, because,
Sure.
your kids developing into financially competent adults is a peace of mind thing for
Yeah.
parents. So,
And that financial competence goes right alongside of raising independent adults.
yep,
There we
for
go.
sure.
Yep.
All right. Well, if someone is listening, actually, there's lots of people listening, but if they would like to reach out to you directly, Abby, what is the best way?
Email. So it's Abbey, ABBEY, at abarisfinancialgroup.com. And that's ABARISFINANCIALGRP.
We'll put the link on our notes.
That was the serious mistake in the name of the firm, that the email handle is so long.
Yeah. We understand that because we are
Parent Coaches Unleashed.
Yeah.
It is a mouthful for sure.
Yeah. And make sure to check out Wealth Beyond Riches with Abbey Henderson, her podcast as well. And thank you so much for joining us today. This was very enlightening, and I hope everyone else felt the same too.
So thank you for being with us today, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica. Together, we can raise the next generation of independent, capable, and compassionate young adults.
We encourage you to send us an email with questions and feedback to info@parentcoachesunleashed.com. Please remember, you are not alone on this parenting journey.